very interesting. And music was a huge part of our childhood. I have two sisters, and we have piano lessons, violin lessons. It was so much music, but my father raised my sisters and I on a very, very steady diet of all the best of 60s and 70s music. So one of my first memories is singing Happy Birthday, Bob Dylan, on Bob Dylan's now 50th birthday. And until I was 11, I was telling a friend this recently, I think it's testament to how lovely my dad is. Until I was 11, I thought the lyrics were knocking on Heather's door.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and joining me today is Heather McRobbie, and we are doing a B-side episode. We are not talking Bruce, we are talking another fabulous musician, though, as always, we'll probably throw a little Bruce in there. But for now, Heather, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's such a wonderful concept. And I also want to just caveat right at the start, Leonard Cohen is my great love, and that's what I'll be talking about. But I absolutely love Bruce Springsteen as well. So happy for anything to venture into Springsteen territory as well.
Well, very nice. So we'll have to do both. So tell us a little about yourself.
Sure. So I'm British, Australian academic of law, and especially human rights law. I'm currently living in Iceland, which is a bit of a kind of funny footnote to my life trajectory, because I got a job here just before COVID hit. So I'm heading back to the UK pretty soon, but have spent a very pleasant year in Iceland, which has been great. But in my 20s, I lived all around the world, working as a journalist and working on human rights law.
So Iceland is the green one, correct? And Greenland
Right.
is the
Greenland
ice.
is the
Yes,
icy one.
yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, very nice. How it that so how long were you planning to be in Iceland before COVID hit?
Yeah, I wasn't sure, but COVID made the decision pretty easy for me. I was
Yeah.
in London the week that the world fell apart, like sort of March 8th, 2020.
Yes.
And my little sister is an epidemiologist, and she and my dad were sort of like, pick where you're going to spend the next 9 months now because the world is about to implode. So then I hopped on sort of the last plane from London to Iceland and then waited it out here.
I,
So it's been a bit like Iceland, like New Zealand, was kind of one of the success stories globally because it's
yeah.
quiet, it's no big massive social problems and for it to intersect with, and no
Mhm.
massively dense urban areas. It's a population of 350,000, so I've had a
Yeah.
much better time than a lot of people. Talking to a lot of my folks in other parts of the world, I know I've had a good experience compared to many over the last year, so I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, and Heather, you win the Trooper Award because of the time difference. You know, I was, it's always interesting with time zones. And you're like, oh, I'm a late owl. I'm like, are you sure? You're like, oh no, 2, 3 in the morning, no problem, Jesse. So I
Exactly.
appreciate that.
It's totally fine. I can easily go back into owl mode from my grad school days, so it's totally
Okay,
fine.
very nice, very
Glad we can
nice.
catch each other.
So it's been a good year in Iceland.
Yeah, actually, compared to a lot of the world, I basically, just because I knew, okay, I'm stuck on this island, this is it. So I sort of explored every corner of it, and that's been really wonderful, really special. It's a really magical place. Got to see the Northern Lights a lot,
Oh, how
got to
beautiful.
see waterfalls, went hiking, and yeah. So I'm whale watching. So I'm very lucky. I'm very aware of how lucky I am. Yeah.
You're mentioning the story about almost the last flight out of England, and I just was a guest host on a podcast about Casablanca There's a
Oh,
there's a
wow.
podcast talking about they are going through every Oscar winner and talking about it. And
Right.
I signed up to talk Casablanca, and I'm picturing right, like that
Right.
they
I
talk about
know.
the last thing, and here you are,
Exactly.
almost
Yeah.
like a refugee leaving UK.
Exactly. I feel like like so many of us will have these stories now where like we meet again with people for whom we
Yes,
were separated over the last year. We'll have these sort of war story, and I ended up here and you ended up, I had a friend who ended up in Italy, and it does feel like stories from my grandparents' days, like, we got on the last train, that kind of thing. One thing that's also been very good is I lived in the former Yugoslavia in my early to mid 20s. I lived in Sarajevo. So a lot of my very close friends are from that region, from all of the countries around there. But talking to my Bosnian friends helped me a lot throughout 2020 because they were like, well, we did this for 3 years and we had no water and no electricity and there were bombs falling. So, like, whenever I felt kind of a bit frustrated at lockdown, they helped. But they weren't kind of laughing at, they were
yeah,
empathetic to the pain people were in now as well, but they were just
yes,
giving me like really good tips, like, because there's a lot of power cuts in Iceland from the blizzards.
yeah.
Um, and so they were just, they kind of like had their like 101 and like, well, this is how you have to survive when you're trapped in a room for, a long period of time.
Yeah, it was it's so interesting. So you are heading home soon?
Yeah, heading back to the UK to check in with family and
That'll
yeah,
be nice.
yeah, it'll be
Yeah.
great.
What has been the gig this past year?
So I've been teaching human rights law and climate law,
Okay.
which has been really, really great and really exciting. And then while I was here, I got interested in this new kind of law, which I kind of sometimes tell people as a joke and sometimes tell people seriously, depending on like where they're at. But space law,
Okay.
which is my new passion. Because I've worked on human rights for basically a decade, and then climate, intersects
Sure.
with that in all sorts of ways, which is what brought me here, to be lecturing on human rights law. But over the last year, I've developed this big passion for space law and like the Outer Space Treaty and how are we going to devise the rules of the game for this new era of space exploration. So that's actually been. I mean, I'm actually serious about it. Like, I'm actually writing a book about it, but it's also my kind of like joke line at
Yeah.
parties because I know it does sound a bit outlandish.
I don't know how much you follow US politics, but I'm in Texas, and one of
Oh,
our
right. Yeah. Yeah.
senators is a guy named Ted Cruz. And
Right.
he
Yes. Familiar
recently,
thing.
yeah, he recently tweeted, right, that Joe Biden is more interested in Paris than he is the people of Pittsburgh because, he re-signed the US up for the Paris, climate
Sure.
treaty. And he was mocked pretty carefully that um, it was signed in Paris. It has nothing to do with Paris itself, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I guess on both, and I promise we won't stick in politics too long, but from a perspective of climate control law and human rights, this past 4 years must have been, you must be shaking your head going, what the, and I just talked about not cussing, but right, what the
Yeah.
F?
Right,
What is
right.
the US
I
thinking?
mean, yeah, I'm also trying to not like comment publicly on politics. Like
Yes.
I didn't have
Okay.
a Twitter account for the
Okay.
entire duration of the Trump administration
Okay.
because just for the sake of like
Sure.
the
Absolutely.
pH level of my brain being like, but I mean, I'm also an academic of constitutions, right? So
Okay.
everything that went, I couldn't not think when everything that happened, the Capitol, the kind of this last hurrah of the Trump
Yes.
administration, and I was like, I literally study, the value of like constitutions and constitutional law. So all of these discussions, I mean, it's so awful for the damage that's been done, but I mean, it's also a very interesting time to sort of be alive as someone who studies constitutions because
Oh,
this
I
is all about
imagine. You know,
constitutional law.
there's been a lot, and there's been a lot of talk, and I remember, people reporting that when way back when I believe it was Adams lost the presidency, and he just gave up power, and that the world was shocked that that
Right,
actually would work, and
right,
we just treat that up until this time as that's what happens,
right, right.
every 4 years, and it was interesting because they showed, um, like Al Gore he lost and he presided over the Senate, giving the election to Bush,
Right. Right.
same thing with Dan Quell.
Yeah.
They did not win re-election, and he's presiding, and it's just the beauty of that. And I am hoping we're on a better path. I will say
Yeah,
that.
the pH level has sort of returned to something
Yes.
more hospitable. Or the public discourse in general will just
Yeah.
kind of like return to something that's not, kind of aggravating to the psyche. And it's
Yeah.
across the spectrum. I mean, I study human rights. I'm a my politics are progressive, but also, if I also have friends who are Republican, and if I was a Republican right now, I would also feel like an affront to the good people in that part. I mean, what would John McCain think looking at this
Yes.
after the kind of the dignity with which he held himself? So it's not kind of party political in that sense.
Exactly.
I really hope that like the value of rule of law is
Yeah.
reestablished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My last statement, and then we'll move to something fun. I have a very good friend who is very conservative. I actually have a
Mm.
couple of friends, but and like one of them said he wants to get back to, I want everyone to have health insurance. You want everyone to have health insurance. We disagree how to do it.
How to go about
Let's
right,
talk and figure out
exactly.
how to do it. I
Exactly.
want safe
Yeah,
borders. You want safe borders. Let's talk
exactly.
about how we do this. In other words, it,
Exactly.
it, it we the reality is most people want the same thing, regardless of which side of the aisle they're on.
Right,
And we
right.
need to get back to, okay, let's talk about where we can
It-
find
exactly. Common ground,
compromise.
and
Yeah.
solve these
Yeah.
problems together.
Compromise is
Yeah.
not a bad word.
Yeah. No, no,
And yeah,
exactly.
okay, very nice. All right, so I always like to go to the beginning. So
Sure.
talk about growing up, Heather. What kind of music did your family listen to when you were a little one?
Sure. So I was raised by my father, who is from an area very significant in musical history of the 20th century. He's from Merseyside.
Okay.
And he was sort of like I actually tease him that he has like a John Lennon narrative, because he was like the one who made it out. He were from Merseyside. He was the first one in his family to like stay in school, not kind of go down work in the factory, but instead went to university to study engineering, which is very classically, working class thing for someone of his generation to go and study. He's now a professor of engineering. So our kind of class trajectory was kind of, Britain, everything's about the class system. Our kind of growing up was kind of very, very interesting, and music was a huge part of our childhood. I have two sisters, and we have piano lessons, violin lessons. It was so much music, but my father raised my sisters and I on a very, very steady diet of all the best of 60s and 70s music. So one of my first memories is singing Happy Birthday Bob Dylan on Bob Dylan's now 50th birthday. And until I was 11, I was telling a friend this recently, I think it's a testament to how lovely my dad is. Until I was 11, I thought the lyrics were knocking on Heather's door, because he changed it when he would
Yes.
sing it to me. I thought it was knocking on Heather's door. But weirdly, I don't ever remember hearing him playing Leonard Cohen. It was a lot of like Simon and Garfunkel.
Yeah.
There are a lot of that was like our kind of our car music. And my dad weirdly always really had his finger on the pulse, maybe because he was an academic as well, so he meets young people. So I remember like in the 90s we had a cassette tape of like Madonna's Immaculate Collection,
Okay.
and I knew all these reference point like Michael Jackson things from things my dad was playing, but the bass line was like 60s and 70s, and Simon and Garfunkel was like the big one. I don't know why that spoke to him so much. um and then of course, like the Beatles have a special place for him, as I think it does for anyone of his generation. He was a
Oh,
bit younger than them, but I
okay.
imagine growing up that was like such a huge influence, like in Mersey as a young man in Merseyside. Yeah.
Oh, I bet. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, when as you started growing up, and starting, what we call high school, you guys call secondary school, and you get
Sure.
university. Did you find your own music? What kind of music did you like then?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I had a friend who was like the coolest person in the world at that point in my life. She's still an incredibly cool person.
Okay.
She's currently on the front lines of the NHS, so so probably intubating people right now and doing amazing, amazing work. My friend Sarah, who was partly of like Jamaican descent, so she
Okay.
introduced me to this whole other world when I was sort of in high school. But she also once did this thing. She made me a box full of cassettes of cool, because this was the late 90s, of
Yeah.
cool things we recorded. And I remember she made me a cassette of this band called Radiohead.
Sure.
And I was like, oh, there's this band called Radiohead. And so, okay, computer, so we were like, I'm not quite a digital native. Because I was born in 1985. I'm like on the cusp of
Sure.
that world. Like we kind of got the internet in high school, but we didn't learn about music from the internet. You learned it because like your friend who's cooler than you made you a cassette. And
Yes.
so she made me cassettes of kind of cool 90s music. When Britpop was like so big
Yeah.
in London in the 90s, that whole like Blur, Oasis drama, I remember being thing. But within that, my two big loves of like kind of on the edges of Britpop were, because they were kind of also really doing their own thing, was Radiohead and Pulp. And both
Okay.
those bands I thought were that like really kind of like, wow, they're speaking about like issues that, like Radiohead were singing about like the Tory government and alienation and teen angsty feelings, and
Sure.
Pulp similarly were this sort of like really biting humor, this like visceral critique of the class system,
Hmm.
and kitchen sink dramas in song form. So that was like my, and dad had never heard that, so I kind of came back home and like play, oh, hey dad, there's this band called Radiohead, let me play that on the cassette. So that was kind of a cool like shift in our dynamic.
That's awesome. That's really great. So when you reached out to me, you said that you said, "Hey, I'm a big Leonard Cohen fan. Would you want to have me on there?" And absolutely. So, talk to me. How did you find him, and how did you find his music,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
what about it spoke to you?
Sure. So interestingly, I don't know why he wasn't in my dad's kind of landscape of the people that he did, because he would play us so much like John Baez. And we also had piano music because we were all piano players, the sheet music of it. So we would have the sheet music of like, Joan Baez, Paul Simon, these kind of contemporaries to Leonard Cohen. But I never heard of Leonard Cohen. And then my coolest friend in the world, Sarah, amazing Sarah, who's now, saving lives as a doctor, made me a tape of Nina Simone. And I discovered Leonard Cohen through Nina Simone, because Nina Simone, in her brilliant, she did covers so well, and the way that she made these songs her own. She did a cover of Suzanne. And so the first time I heard a Leonard Cohen song, it was because I was listening to a cassette of Nina Simone that my amazing friend Sarah had made me. Um, and I think it took me a while to learn that was Leonard Cohen. And from there, I went out and bought. Then it was a CD. I'd moved up in the world. Life had moved
Sure,
on.
absolutely.
A
Yes.
CD of Leonard Cohen, and took it to university, which I know is super cliche, right? Like being an undergrad in your college dorm listening to Leonard Cohen. But there was just this one Leonard Cohen CD. I think it was like called the best of Leonard Cohen, that got me through like my first winter at university, as I was sort of shifting, oh, big scary, new world, writing my essays and what have I done with my life, and boys and drama and who am I. And it
Mhm.
was just this Leonard Cohen CD. So the tracks, like things like, so which was a range of his work from the 60s to the 80s all at once. So it wasn't one album. But a lot of like the 60s stuff, like Hey, That's No Way to Say Goodbye, or like Seems So Long Ago, Nancy. But then all at the same time, his like 80s stuff, like The Future. So I kind of got this whole spectrum at once. And I then kind of discovered, the 3 years that I was at university, discovered all of his work, kind of became a sort of Leonard Cohen completist. And as I was applying to graduate school, and this is where this story, I like to think this is like just a a cute footnote to my life. I like to
Okay.
think other people may pathologize this as like, okay, you took it too far. But I was like 21 and I was like, what do I want to do with my life? Where do I go? I barely left the UK at this point. So from little like school trips to France. Like we weren't, some big jet setting, my dad's, teaching engineering. I was looking around and I was like, well, Leonard Cohen went to McGill and Montreal sounds amazing. So I stuck in one application to one university as I was finishing my degree for graduate school, and it was to Montreal, and I got in. And so that actually Leonard Cohen shaped the trajectory of my life, because everything that came from then was from this year that I spent in Montreal studying Middle Eastern politics. So yes,
That's kind of cool.
yeah, I mean, there are worse things as a 21-year-old when you're, that anxiety of like, I'm all potential and what could the world be and who might I become?
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind that I made that choice, right? Of all the choices that I could have made.
Yeah. So I always ask this question when I'm talking about Bruce, about what about his music spoke to you. You've kind of talked about it a little bit, but can you, as someone who's written, about him and shared, can you summarize what about his music
Sure.
just
Yeah,
touched that part of you?
sure. And I apologize I didn't answer that
No,
question
that's okay.
directly to the person. Um, I think it was his wisdom and
Okay.
his timelessness, that he was so of the zeitgeist in so many ways. He could really capture a cultural moment, a mood.
Yeah.
He play as Springsteen does as well. He plays highbrow lowbrow mix up very
Yeah.
well, right? So like 1 second you're in the Talmud and the next second you're in LA.
Hmm.
But I think that like why it was Cohen and not one of his great, who I always have a lot of respect, like it was never Dylan for me, it was always Cohen for me. And I think it was his wisdom and his
Hmm.
ability to hold multiple perspectives at once, which I felt that other singer songwriters of that era didn't do. Like, Cohen, I think, for instance, I mean, this is a whole other huge conversation, but understands women a lot better than a lot of his, male narcissist
Yeah.
contemporaries who are all singing about the difficulties of their perspective in the situation. Cohen, kind of like a playwright, was looking at all of the actors involved at once and having empathy for all of them at once. And I found that so kind of astonishing.
You know, what I was talking to you before we hit record about JB and Rob's, Springsteen podcast, where they go through each song and they talk about
Sure.
that, um, Bruce early, "Hey little girl, is your daddy home?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
want to marry you, girl." I mean, the
yeah,
the
yeah.
the phrase "girl" can come across very in modern
Sure. Got you.
hearing, right? That you
Yeah.
go, and I think that's fascinating that you felt like, you know, Leonard was a little more aware of
Yeah.
possibly.
I
That's
mean,
interesting.
I mean, you can also, I mean, I value him for his, and I also value Bruce. I don't want to play, I mean, I am a feminist, but I wouldn't
Yeah.
accuse either Bruce Springsteen or Leonard Cohen of misogyny. I would say that their music was products of their times, and
Oh,
that
absolutely. I agree with that.
so that
Yes.
language has changed. But on a deal, at the same, because I don't think that being a sexist or being a misogynist means that you hate or don't value women.
Right.
And I think none of that comes through in either Springsteen or
Yeah.
Cohen's work. I think the jury's out on Dylan, actually. That's a controversial conversation.
Yes.
The viciousness of those songs about Edie Sedgwick are incredibly, incredibly kind of brutal in a very like way that I don't think that Springsteen or Cohen would ever be. But it is interesting, both of them, their trajectories over time. There's a really interesting connection I wanted to make, but maybe we'll get to this organically. Sorry, I'm sorry if I'm like
No,
jumping.
please go. You're doing great.
I mean, you can't kind of talk about Cohen without talking about Judaism.
Okay.
That's so integral, like his Old Testament reference points. But what was so interesting about Cohen is like a lot of his lyrics actually kind of touch on the new. He was Jewish. He was from a Cohen family, but and raised in an observant home. In Montreal, and that sort of fuses his work. But I think he had a Catholic nanny,
Okay.
and Montreal is very Catholic, and so there like a lot of he also, I mean, like Suzanne, like is Jesus walking on the water. There's so many like New Testament touch points for him, like coming from his Jewishness. And Springsteen is so interesting because he was Catholic, but his Catholic heritage, but one of my dearest friends in the world is from New Jersey, and he was raised an observant Jew, and is the biggest Springsteen fan, and pointed me to all these articles that you may have come across, like in the Atlantic, of like Springsteen as an honorary Jew, because it's he also has these really interesting, Cain and Abel references. So from his Catholicism, he also kind of touches on the Old Testament, and there's that thing, sociologically very interesting, right, of and I'm not a North American, so I apologize if I'm being a bit
you're doing great.
blunt here, but of the non-WASP, like I won't, like the phrase that I was as a historian, like the sort of white ghetto of like of the Irish, Italian, and Jewish communities, and how those, the cultural interplays between those, which was also super interesting. Like with Liverpool, there was that big, the Irish immigrant community, Lennon and McCartney, both, children of Irish immigrants. So there's really interesting kind of cultural threads in their music. And it's not because like Leonard Cohen spoke to me like in a religious way. It was more just that like you could feel like he was bringing all that wisdom to the table to bear upon a contemporary experience, right? Which is a great kind of lens through which to see the world, and also a good perspective. You kind of feel like he's saying like, yeah, this girl broke my heart, but God's laughing at all of this.
That is great. First off, I want you to reach out to your friend from New Jersey and ask him to join me on the show. Okay. Secondly, I have a friend that I have made through the podcast, Bella Pori, who is a lesbian, and she says that, believe it or not, there is a group that Bruce Springsteen is a lesbian icon in certain groups. Yes.
Really? That's very cool.
So I think it's kind of fun that, and honorary Judaism, she has shared that there, and in fact, one of my favorite episodes is she joined me and she shared Bruce Springsteen's gayest songs.
That's very cool.
Actually did, yeah. She talked about what these songs were.
That's
and yes, and she had a theory that Western Star was all songs about gay lovers and that all the relationships. Yes. So I think that's fascinating. You mentioned that you're a big Springsteen fan too. How did you discover Bruce?
I think later. So one thing is I discovered probably a little late when I was in Montreal is when I listened to Springsteen. I did the thing, and I apologize, but I'm putting this on the table in that acknowledgement of like shed snake skins of former self.
Yeah.
And there's also a super interesting Cohen reference point with this, is that like many people of a later generation who, you discover the pop culture of your parents, mediate through pop culture. I knew him through Born to Run, which I'm sure is a terrible thing to say.
No, not at all.
But that was a touch, and I didn't. And why I'm saying there's a really interesting reference, but I was thinking before we started talking about really interesting Cohen Springsteen parallels, and one fascinating one that we could probably just talk about an hour is they're both known for a song that is completely misunderstood, right? So this whole Born to Run being used, it's this critique of the American dream, but being used in this very like bombastic nationalistic way, and Leonard Cohen's Alleluia, which is again like if you ask the average person who Leonard Cohen, they'd say Alleluia the way that people would say Born to Run for Springsteen.
Yes.
And it's actually it's this very sort of Jewish complex song about sort of sex and death.
Well,
but gets used as a kind of hallmark.
You read my mind.
Okay.
Yes,
you made
I
this
have that note because the night before Joe Biden's inauguration, so last Tuesday night, right, they're doing this COVID-19 memorial.
Right.
And all of a sudden they have a beautiful version.
Yeah, it was
Hallelujah.
lovely.
But my wife looks over and she goes, this isn't the song you play at a memorial.
Right,
and
right.
and I
You
said
know,
yes. She
yeah.
is she
Not to
adores.
laugh at the memorial. I
No,
apologize
no,
for that.
no.
I'm not
I
laughing
am
at tragedy,
exactly.
but
It's the
it's
same thing uh, when President Trump was in the hospital. His followers were blasting "Born in the USA,"
right,
and we
right,
were
yeah.
like, "Did
Sorry,
have
I
they
meant
never?"
Born in the USA, not Born
Yeah,
to Run. When I
I
said,
knew what you
yeah,
were
the
doing.
one yeah,
Yeah,
Born in the USA, and it got used at a Republican National Convention at one point,
yes,
right?
and they
Yeah,
realized yes, and
yeah. Sorry, I meant
right when it
Born in the
happened, Ronald
USA. Yeah,
Reagan, right, and
yeah.
Bruce made the joke. I don't think he's listened. I don't think Nebraska is his favorite album, right? That,
Right,
you,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. Like, does he not
um,
get? Yeah,
you know,
which
I
must be frustrating, but at the same time, it's very interesting.
it
Um,
is that because, and I think that is a great connection. I just had a guy who's a huge Bee Gees fan on the show,
oh, cool.
and we talked about that. Um, and the similar between Bruce and them is when someone says, "Well, I don't like Bruce Springsteen's music," I want to ask, "Well, have you listened to anything besides the Born in the USA CD?" You
Right.
know,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
he said, and David said yes. And when someone says, "Well, I don't like the Bee Gees," he goes, "Have you listened to anything besides Saturday Night Fever?"
Right,
Right?
exactly,
Exactly.
exactly.
And
Like, yeah,
so,
yeah.
the same thing. Well, I don't get Leonard Cohen. Have you listened to anything besides Hallelujah?
Hallelujah. Well,
Right?
interesting. Cohen said at one point, I think in the 90s, because I think the tipping with Jeff Buckley did this version, very beautiful version, and then tragically died very soon after. So
Right.
I think then in our sort of like the sort of like Gen X to millennial generation, it was the song on all our movies for a
Yes. Oh,
decade. Yeah,
Watchmen. I mean, all kinds of movies have used
yeah.
the song. Yes.
Yeah, and I think he sort of said in the end, maybe have a moratorium for a couple of
Yes.
decades. But the intersection with politics is super fascinating. Both Cohen and Springsteen have also been sort of criticized by both the left and the right. Cohen's song "Democracy" is so interesting,
Hmm.
and in a lot of pop culture, he did say, "Look, I'm not going to spell America with a K like all people trying to be super left, because actually I love the best of America." And he had
Right.
that kind of complex perspective of being kind of critiqued by both sides. Although,
Hmm.
I mean, I'm pretty sure he's pretty, lefty, so
Sure.
pretty progressive, right? But
Well,
and
while you're,
Cohen's Canadian, which adds a kind
yes,
of different element. But did you remember what happened when Trump tried to use, sorry, the Cohen estate issued a statement when Trump tried to use his music in
yes,
2019, 2020.
yeah,
Yeah, and he said, like that the estate said, only if you use "You Want It Darker," which is from his last album, which is this this song about the sort of injustice and brutality of the world. And this is
yeah.
very striking parallel that Cohen died the day that Trump was elected, or within sort of 48 hours. So
Wow, I did not
there's
know
that
that.
yeah, there's that parallel. I was sorry if I'm rambling too much on,
Oh,
but
you're doing fine.
I was I had just finished my PhD, and I took a postdoctoral fellowship at Tel Aviv University, and I was which probably was some people that I spent my 20 learning Hebrew, learning Arabic, getting interested in that part of the world, probably from my undergrad days listening to those Cohen songs about the Yom Kippur War and all of
Yeah.
and how he handles the nuance and complexity of that, like this beautiful line in Democracy. It says, "The wells of disappointment where the women kneel to pray for the grace of God in the desert here and the desert far away." That he's linking like the American desert to this Middle Eastern desert, and how he felt as a kind of a Jew of the diaspora, but was also very empathetic to all sides of that very complex issue. So I was at my friend Sarah's house. We're still best friends, waiting for my flight and packing my bags. And I heard the news that Leonard Cohen had died. And then I got to the airport and landed in Tel Aviv, and then heard the news that Trump was the president. And I was in Tel Aviv, and it was the most intense 48 hours of my life. I remember just sort of crying on this plane, flying into Tel Aviv, trying to process like Leonard Cohen is dead, and be also being surrounded by people reading the Torah. So that was a very kind of like emotional experience. And then landing in Tel Aviv and then thinking, okay, well, what does this presidency mean for this whole region, whatever, whatever
Yeah.
group you're in, most sane people want peace. So what does that mean? So it was a very kind of heightened, intense, 48 hours for me.
Oh, I bet. You
Yeah.
know, my my wife would argue that she's been in 4 years of shock, and
Yeah,
she laughed like, I'm looking forward to not having to watch the news every night. Like,
exactly.
just like, okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, I do think that it's interesting, as you mentioned, um, Leonard Cohen and Bruce and other musicians leaning a little toward the left. I thought it was, um, we were watching after the hour and a half inauguration celebration that was on here at the U.S. And Tom Hanks had hosted it. Bruce did "Land of Hope and Dreams." Um, Bon Jovi did a cover of "Here Comes the Sun." There was a lot of beautiful music, and Joy Reid, the journalist, said
Right.
that um, one of the things that the Republican Party hates is that the Democrats have the culture,
Right.
and that if you the amount of people that lean to the right is a very small percentage of the popular culture, and I'm not saying that with judgment or things, and as we talked about, I think that um there are actually things that if that you could argue for that would be a smaller government,
Mm.
putting getting out of people's lives and letting them make their own
Sure.
choices. The
Yeah.
problem is that they only want to select parts of their pieces, and so
Yeah, exactly.
that's
Yeah.
what frustrates
That's
me.
the problem. Yeah.
um
Yeah.
so um were you ever blessed enough to see him perform live?
I have a funny story that I apologize if my answers have been very long-winded, right? Because
No,
I should
that's
give you
what
more
I
space
love them.
to.
You are fine.
Okay, I should give you more space to ask your
No,
your
no, no,
brilliant,
you're good.
brilliant questions and to talk. So, I never got to see Cohen perform live, even though he had this huge tour in the last decade of his life. And I know this sounds awful, but one of the thoughts that went through my head on this London to Tel Aviv flight, where I was crying for 5 hours, was that so it'll never happen. It'll never happen. I'll never see him live. But I saw him. So I never saw him perform.
Okay.
But in that year in Montreal, that year that I'd moved to Montreal, and I was taking this master's program at McGill and learning Hebrew and Arabic, and getting to the beauty of Montreal, like this amazing place, and learning all this Quebecois literature. It was so many, I was 22. Like I felt like I doubled my knowledge every day in my brain because I was
Sure.
just absorbing things like a sponge, and meeting new people. I remember I was walking down the street near Parc du Portugal. And Cohen would have lived in LA in those days. He wasn't living in Montreal, but he must have been back. I think he was back for Hanukkah or something, because around that time. And I was walking down the street and I saw him in the opposite direction. And I thought, I shouldn't say anything. I shouldn't go approach him, because that would be, I should let him have his peace. Like, how would I feel if I was, accosted and like by a an English girl running up to her saying, I
Yes.
moved to Montreal because of you. But I remember that night so vividly, the fact that I'd seen him and how he looked, and he really did look the way I thought he would look. It kind of kept me warm, like, with like, oh well, I saw Leonard Cohen, everything's gonna be fine. It made me kind of so happy. And I told all my kind of Montrealer friends, and then all of them had a Leonard Cohen. That was so lovely. I mean, I don't know what it's like in New Jersey, how they would feel, Bruce is one of
Yeah.
their own and they'll all have a story. But in Montreal, like, all my friends had a story, and also about what a great guy he was, which is really lovely. They were like, yeah, he was a total mensch. Like, he helped me out with this one thing, or my friend over there. So eventually I wrote a story about it, kind of imagining like all the people, from the 60s to that 40 years of migrations of all the people who've come there because of him, which is really, it's amazing that these people change, that like Springsteen will have changed your life. Like, and,
Yeah.
and that's like a really amazing, beautiful thing.
So I mentioned this story the other day in one of my other podcasts, but there is a wonderful writer named Mark Evanier. He's written comic books. He was the executive producer and writer of the Garfield cartoon series. He was an assistant to Jack Kirby, who was a famous comic book artist, co-creator of Captain America and the X-Men's and just the Fantastic Four and just tons of stuff. But he told the story that as he was a kid, he watched the Dick Van Dyke Show,
Right.
and he loved the Dick Van Dyke Show, and he loved Mary Tyler Moore.
Yeah.
And he said that when he grew up, he wanted to write in television because it looked so much fun, and you got to marry someone like Mary Tyler Moore. So, okay, so he made that joke. And he said in his life, he worked on Welcome Back, Kotter, the sitcom, and he's done other things. So he met Dick Van Dyke, and he says he starts telling the story, and Dick Van Dyke stops him and says, "You wanted to write TV so you could grow up and marry someone like Mary Tyler Moore." And he's like, "Yes." He goes, "You would not believe how many people have told me that story."
Oh, really?
So I wonder if you had gone and talked to Leonard Cohen, he would have sweetly told you, "You will not believe how many people have come to this school in Montreal because of you. You are not alone." And I like to think that's what he would have said.
Yeah, no, exactly.
That's lovely. Yeah. Did and you were talking before we talked, like, where did you publish the story in?
It's a magazine that's now defunct called Disrecord. This is when I was also starting out as a journalist.
Okay.
So then after I was at McGill, I moved out to Jordan, and I was living out in the Middle East working as a journalist.
Okay.
So towards the end of the kind of war and terror era, and I remember, sorry, this is a bit of a segue, but I remember
please.
Obama's inauguration. So the whole time I was at McGill, everyone was, there's this guy called Obama, maybe he can make, and like, I remember the first time I heard Obama's name and all of the kind of optimism, we were like, I like to think I'm still young, but I realize that's almost a kind of half generation ago now that, we were the young ones then. And I remember watching, Obama's inauguration in Jordan, and people kind of talking about, hope, this word of hope, which, it can sound trite, but I remember that as a kind of genuine sentiment, and like how the last 4 years have felt very different to that. If there hasn't been a lot of hope, and I often wonder, Obama's decision to not interject over the last 4 years has been probably very wise. I have like critiques of him, but I think he's wise in that way. And yeah, it's kind of interesting to compare those two moments. So to talk a bit more, sorry, and I hope I'm not talking too much, but
no,
talk a bit more about Cohen and Springsteen and politics. In a way, they're both grappling with these big questions. I mean, Springsteen, I think, is in some ways more political because he's, as an American, really documenting and giving voice to the experiences of like the brokenness of like what these forces do on a person's life.
Yes,
and so
I agree.
in a way, like he, you could say he's not sort of partisan, he's not party political. He would be kind of quite cynical about any kind of money grubbing politician from any world trying to kind of like climb over other people's backs, and he has that very deep empathy for the lives of like working people and their values, and those values can be both liberal and conservative. So yes, Born in the USA is a kind of blistering critique of that ideal that was being fed to them, or that chasm between what you're being told by the politicians and the reality on the ground. But both Springsteen and Cohen feel like I think I said this earlier, because they both had like one foot in the zeitgeist and one foot in the timeless.
Yes.
And I think that's what's so special. It's that alchemy, right, that they bring to kind of to bear on these things, because these stories are still they still feel so true now. Isn't they haven't kind of gone out of date. And Cohen has this line where he says, like, your most specific line will also be your most universal. And I think that Springsteen is such a great storyteller when he's saying, there are these characters, there's Mary, or there's this person, and through that person it becomes so universal and so timeless. I think that's the very specific and amazing alchemy that they both perform in their writing.
So a couple things. One, like Bruce has always said that, you know, chronicling the difference between the American dream and American reality is often his music.
Mm-hmm.
I just had earlier this morning, as we're recording this, I had I'm doing a series of friendship episodes where people that have bonded over Springsteen's music are joining me and kind of sharing their
Oh, that's
story.
lovely.
Yeah,
Oh, that's a nice idea.
and this and what's amazing is Macrina was telling almost exactly what you said. She had spent years working on Clint Black's website, and she had
Okay,
very that, and she said that um, rock and roll is general and country is specific. And they said that
interesting.
like her example was on rock and roll, I'm gonna go pick up my girlfriend and go to the dance.
Yeah,
Country music would be I'm going in my red pickup truck to pick up my girlfriend Sarah to take her to
right.
the barn dance at
That's
the old
so
J to
interesting,
go
isn't
dancing.
it? That's
And
so interesting.
I don't she may have been quoting without realizing Leonard Cohen, because she said um, sometimes the more specific the lyrics are, the more wide reaching, more
Right,
universal the themes are.
right.
And I just thought that's very funny because she talked about that this morning and you're talking about it this
That's
evening.
so interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it
That's,
is.
that's so interesting. And what's so funny, sorry, to like kind of riff on that. Like I remember when I heard Cohen saying that this song, and I'm not just saying this to be sort of sycophantic to you
Yeah.
to be like, yeah, I also like Springsteen. But the first thing I thought of actually was Springsteen. And I thought of my favorite Springsteen song, which is The River,
Okay.
and how specific and how I felt this always feel this overwhelming empathy for them. When he's singing from a male point of view. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a woman. I've never got a girl called Mary pregnant,
Right.
and I've never, or my father. But again, he's kind of probably, from my, respect for my father, this feel of like that idea as a young man, and you get your coat, and like lately there hasn't been much work on the kind of the economy, and
Yeah.
these very specific kind of the life arc that he draws, but how it also feels so universal. I feel like we all can all feel like I almost feel that song when you feel that moment, like when they go down to the river, and you feel like you're there. When I listen to that song, it's so evocative that I literally feel like I'm there.
A couple of things there. One, it's ironic that the line "there hasn't been much work because of the economy" works almost any timeline,
Right,
right?
right.
Which is sad to say.
That's true. Yeah.
The A funny story that probably isn't funny, but I was at Nashville um, at a show, and someone had a sign. Bruce was going through this phase where he picked up signs that people did song requests, and
Okay.
someone said, "It's my 19th birthday, play the river." And we
Oh.
were like, "Have you listened to the song? Just because, like,
Right,
this is not
right,
a happy birthday
right,
song." I mean,
right.
it's not as misunderstood as Born in the USA
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Hallelujah, maybe, but it is not. So I have a question for you, and it's okay if you don't have an answer, but
Sure.
I've been thinking a lot lately. Is the couple in the river, would they say they have a successful marriage? Now I know in real life,
Yeah,
absolutely. His sister, she talked about, she was very honest that when she heard it the first time, she goes, "Oh my God, it's my life." And they
yeah,
have stayed married and they have had a
yeah.
wonderful career. And I think I think they would. I think the characters in the song would say, "Hey, nothing is perfect,
Yeah.
And we don't always reach our dreams, but
Yeah.
we're together. You know, we've fought the battles that come together, and we're staying there together. And maybe, you know, is a dream alive that doesn't come true, but maybe we had a different
Yeah.
dream, right?
Right, right, right.
So
Although at the
your
same time,
thoughts?
that's such an interesting question, and it's such an evocative depiction of, you know, young people trying to figure out how they're gonna get by, right? But at the same, so I was very with you the whole time you were saying that, and they probably would, but would they be lying to themselves? I guess that's a kind of question. But that line, is a dream alive? It don't come to, or is it something worse? That's the
Yes.
killer, right? That's
Yes,
the killer line.
it is.
Yeah, and that's the line I always, and you could, that's the line that kind of gets me from the whole song. You feel
Absolutely.
that they're carrying that with them. I act like I don't remember, she acts like she don't care. So like
Yes.
between the two of them, they both got their coping mechanisms to get through
Yes.
this reality. But at the same time, it's not nothing in this sort of implied that they turn. And so many of Cohen's songs are about how things go wrong in the dance of relations between men and women, right?
Right.
And I feel like this doesn't actually have that, like they each carry their pain, but they're not hurting each other. That's
Right.
the difference, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. And yeah. Um yeah, and you know, one of the things that, you know, I'm going to go back to what you said a little bit a while ago about you certainly would not say that neither Bruce nor Leonard were, you know, misogynist. And
Mm.
I think back when I read his autobiography, you know, Bruce is very vocal about his first marriage failing because of his inadequacies and his
Right. Yeah.
fears.
Yeah. I
You
know
know,
that. Yeah, I've read this. That
yeah,
he's so honest. He's so
yes.
self-aware.
Hmm.
I think which in itself I found so refreshing coming from like, you
Yes.
know, a famous male musician.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. And you know, he talked about that, you know, and in fact there's this line in the film Western Stars. I don't know if you've gotten to see it. It's a beautiful film where they filmed in this beautiful barn that's on his property, that the Western Stars album. And in between songs they filmed things he wrote and monologues about the songs.
Okay. No, I haven't
And
seen it.
yeah,
I think
it's definitely worth checking out. And he said
yeah.
that there was a time in his life that if you loved him, he would push you away
Right.
before you
Yeah.
had a chance to push him away.
Yeah. But we had a chance to hurt him.
Yeah,
Yeah. Which is a
exactly.
defense
And
mechanism. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that self-awareness of,
Mm.
you know, knowing, and he said, you know, he's gone through a lot of therapy and a lot of work on that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Do Are there songs, you've quoted several, but is there songs that have helped you through different, either to help you celebrate parts in your life or helped you get through, you know, tough points in your life?
With Cohen, for
Yes.
sure. The more, I wouldn't say abstract because again they're very specific, but the ones to do with uh humans in the face of darkness, and I think
Okay.
he got that so well. I remember reading, so another, I'm a big fan of Nick Cave, actually. I think this is how my like Australianness, you know, it's
Okay.
interesting when Nick Cave, and also like Jewishness and Christianity, because Nick Cave has this, you know, very Christian way of being in the world, but from a, not in any way that is sort of like um you know, right wing bigot would understand. You know,
Yeah.
he's singing a lot of, well, you know, the Bible is full of sex and death and complexity and cruelty. But I'm a big fan of Nick Cave as well. And Nick Cave had this sort of point. His son very tragically died
Hmm.
at a very young age, and Cohen just said to him like, I'm with you, brother. And that was the thing that comforted Nick Cave, because kind of Cohen knew darkness. Like he'd looked to the abyss. And so when he kind of sang about it, it kind of comforted others in that moment. And I think it's probably kind of a bit of a cliche on college campuses, like the depressive listening to Leonard Cohen. But he kind of operates on a level where he kind of knows the dark night of the soul, and so he'll be with you through it. He has this song called Night Comes On, which I think is about suicide. It's kind of like it's sort of to doing visiting a mother's grave, which again I find, you know, very personal, and also to do with contemplating, I want to cross over, I want to go on, but this voice says go back to the world, and having that moment of like, but you have to go, like always feeling this pull, like go, you have to go back to the world. And eventually for him, it's his children, like his son and his daughter, come out of the water and say, Papa, you promised to play. So then he has to go back to the world, which I think is very beautiful. Night Comes On is one, and another one like If It Be Your Will. A lot of his reworking of these very kind of Jewish traditions, which I didn't grow up with it in my home so much, but I kind of since learned like of like the name, like a name being sacred and a name being beautiful, like Who by Fire, and then him putting this spin on it, like, and who should I say is calling. And then I've since been in synagogues and I was like, okay, Who by Brave Ascent, but Who by Accident. They like these repetitions of like, and who by and who in solitude, and who in mercy, and who and who and who, and it means like, it means Hashem, it means God. But for him, for Cohen, he's reworked, it has this duality. It can work in a religious sense or in a secular sense of just like, and who will complete me, and it's just about looking for connection. And I find that so beautiful about him, that you don't need to be religious to appreciate him, because he's operating on all of those levels as much as it can get a bit, you know, using Alleluia, and it's actually about, you know, David lusting after Bathsheba, and you know, when you know, and it gets used as this sort of like trite hymn. But I love that about him. I love that he kind of had one foot in, you know, the 60s and one foot in the Talmud. So the wisdom that he brings from that is so precious.
Both of all those sound beautiful. You know, candidly, I know very little of his music, and so I'm probably going to ask you, Heather, to
Make you play
send
this, right?
exactly that. You know, I
I
want
would
you to
vote for
virtually
you.
send me a cassette,
I would
right?
vote it
That
too,
says like, "Hey,
like my
Jesse,
cool
here's
friend
this," and
Sarah. I'll
yes,
find you be my cool friend Sarah to
I
say.
want you to be Sarah to me, absolutely. Um, you know, because um, in Bruce's High Hopes album, you know, he wrote a song called "This Is Your Sword,"
Yeah,
and that is all about, you know, this shield will protect your sacred heart, this sword will defend from what comes in the dark. Should you grow weary on the battlefield, do not despair, our love is real. And I do think that there there is, at times, there's a spirituality in Bruce's work that
mm,
it sounds like on Leonard's as well,
yeah,
that there is um a you know, Bruce's latest album, Letter to You, is all about, you know, the first single was Ghost, and it's talking what
right,
led to this, right, is that
yeah,
he was the last man alive from his
yeah.
first rock band.
Right, I saw it in interview. Sorry to interrupt. I saw an
Yeah.
interview where he said that, and then I also thought of Cohen, and Cohen had this sort of great sort of late style flourishing, where
Mhm.
he basically spent about sort of 20 years writing very candidly about death, about
Mhm.
about mortality,
Yeah.
and like this. I mean, you know, I hope that Springsteen's with us for another 30 years, I'm
I
sure,
so hope so too,
but
but yes.
exactly. But what I mean is more the wisdom that comes from having kind of faith in your life, you know, having which only comes with time. Like young men can't write those songs.
No,
It
you
only
can't.
comes from having known someone for 40 years and then that person not being with you anymore, or it being the last. I that really touched me when I heard that he was the last surviving member of his original band. Like I was watching an interview when he said that, and it kind of stayed with me all day.
Yeah.
Um, because that's something that I feel they can bring all of their brilliance to, but it is in a way, you know, the ultimate thing,
Mhm.
and so many people can't, you know, it's much easier to write a love song about kind of, you know, the girl you want to go to prom with
Yeah.
when you're, you know, like when you're
Yes,
17,
exactly.
you know, to kind of have the strength within you
Yeah.
and the wisdom within you to produce the kind of songs that he's produced, that Springsteen's producing now.
Yeah. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to Letter to You, the album.
I've listened to songs from it. Yeah.
Yeah, and and that his finest song, the final song is "I'll See You in My Dreams," and um, it is, "I'll see you in my dreams when all summers have come to an end. I'll see you
Right.
in my dreams. We'll meet and live and love again."
Right.
And I just think that's beautiful. And I think you said it perfectly, you know, Heather, that um, you can only talk about that after experience. Like
Yeah.
I Tunnel of Love is an album that I really love, and I had a guest 3 or 4 years ago said that you have to have gone through a relationship or had your heart broken 2 or 3 times before
Yeah.
you can appreciate the songs on Tunnel to Love.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Like it's easy to do Born to Run because you're young and you want to get
Right.
out and
Yeah.
you
It's
want to
kind of
escape.
jubilant.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it is that, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, so I have to ask, how many countries have you lived in?
It's a good question. I think at one point, I think there was a 10-year period where I did almost one a year. They depend, like the boundaries got a bit blurry.
Yeah.
Years of the Arab revolutions when I was in Egypt and Tunisia. But yeah, I basically, I also, again, it's like the seasons of your life. I think I just got this kind of absolute urge to just like consume the entire world. I just wanted to see everything and eat everything and read everything. And I was just so itinerant. And I'm now winding down and had this kind of like, Reykjavik is sort of I'm going to keep Iceland in my life. And keep an affiliation here, but now like kind of have this anchoring in home, right? Like I want to get home.
Yes, I
So
bet.
which feels good as well. It feels good to, I felt like I had that period.
Hmm.
And now I'm kind of like returning to
Good.
something new. Yeah.
What's next on your life's journey?
Oh, I like doing. Well, I actually have a position back in the UK to be teaching on human rights law, and I've got a novel coming out this year, which is exciting.
Oh,
Because yeah,
exciting.
which is kind of from my travel life. So it's set in Budapest, and it's about people in their. So in a way, it's a shed snakeskin of a former version of myself. I probably listened to lots of Leonard Cohen as I was writing it, but it's finally coming out, so that's cool. And
When's it coming out?
in November.
Okay.
Um, and I also I am actually working on space lore, which a year ago was a joke, but now it's a real thing. So it feels like
Yeah.
I'm coming home with lots of like richness, like lots to work
Okay.
on, and so that feels really good. Yeah,
All right. So I first off, you owe me a mixtape, a
I
virtual one.
more than happy
Okay,
to
I
have
want
you.
that. Secondly, book it now in October or whenever you're ready to start promoting your new novel. I want you back on the show,
Oh,
and we're
you're
going to
so
promote it.
kind.
Okay.
That's really lovely of you.
I look forward to reading it, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to help you promote it
That's so
because you are
kind.
just a joy.
Well,
Um,
likewise. I hope I didn't talk too much because I feel like you have so much wisdom. I wish I know it's not the dynamic, but I would have asked you many
no,
questions.
no,
Really,
no. Well,
perspectives. Yeah.
you are welcome anytime if you want to turn around the microphone, and we could schedule another one, and you
Yeah.
could just ask me questions.
To be honest, you've been kind of inspired. But I hope I don't feel disrespected by this. I'm not saying that like anyone could do it. I'm sure you do incredibly hard work and it takes a very specific skill set. But I have actually been inspired like from this to think maybe I should make a Leonard Cohen podcast.
Well, I
And think
would
people have so many things
absolutely,
to think about
I, I,
space.
I would love to be your first guest.
I would love to.
I can
That
do
would be
that, and
wonderful.
if you want to do this, I will help you any way I can.
Oh,
I
that's so
absolutely
kind of
would
you.
be
That's
that lovely.
very,
That
very
would be
kind of
great.
you. Very generous person.
What should I have asked you that I didn't, Heather?
Oh, that's a lovely question. You've been so good, and you've also been very tolerant of my rather circuitous rambling answers. I hope you don't have to do too much editing. Um, that's such a great question. I think you covered everything so well. I
Okay,
mean, I'm
good.
trying to think of anything. Maybe it would just be, well, I was going to say you didn't ask me what my favorite Leonard Cohen song is, and I'm glad you didn't because I don't know if I have one. So it's
Okay.
good job you didn't ask me
Yeah.
that question. Yeah.
I get asked all the time, what's your favorite Bruce song?
Yeah, what do
And
you
I usually say Land of Hope and Dreams, Better Days, and then the third just depends on the day, right?
Okay, okay,
So
yeah.
I get that. And I think
Mhm.
when you are this passionate about an artist, it's hard to put down just one song, right?
Exactly, exactly. I'd feel like I was kind of cutting edges off Cohen if I just kind of
Yes.
put one. Yeah.
Hmm. Good. Um, all right. So before I let you go, I've got to ask you the Mary question.
Sure.
So, for those of you who are friends of Heather and you've joined the podcast for the first time and
And
you're
please
going, Mary question, what the hell are you talking about, Jesse? Um, Jay Armstrong is an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area. He just recently retired, but for many years he taught honors English. And his senior class, they would spend 2 days breaking apart the Bruce Springsteen song Thunder Road. They would go through all the lyrics, they would talk about the imagery and the themes that Bruce discussed. They often compare it to Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken.
Mm,
And then at the end of the 2 days, he looks at his class and he says, does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
right.
So, Heather, that is your question. Does Mary get in the car?
Yes. But I don't know if I can justify that position. Is that
Uh,
okay? Is
Yeah,
that
that's
okay?
okay. I do
It's
think it's funny that that's the first one word answer you've given me yet tonight.
oh, my
No.
very verbose, my very verbose responses. Sorry.
No, that's great. No, that is wonderful. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
If someone wants to reach you, are you on social media? Is there a way to reach you?
Yeah, sure. I've got a Facebook page. I think it's Heather Port Book is my Facebook page for my book about ports, which is coming out.
Okay.
Or Heather McRoby. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, thank you so much again.
No, this is great.
I apologize.
I've had a blast. I love talking to you. You tell great stories, and I can't wait to get the virtual mixtape. And I don't know, I may hit you up again that for you to kind of talk about my impressions of the songs, if you'd be willing.
I'd absolutely love that. That would be absolutely wonderful. And please let me know if I can ever put you in touch with anyone who
I
I
will.
might know.
Okay.
My friend Josh, the New Jersey Jewish academic, I think
Yes.
would
I
love to
would
have
love to have him on there. Yes,
yeah,
and you're gonna have me on. We're gonna have you on so you can promote the book.
that's
And I
very
tell you what, if you want to ask me questions, sometimes that's good. And we should talk about doing some Leonard Cohen. I mean, if you have fans and friends, I'd love to have you. We could give you the spot here on Set Listing Bruce. You
oh,
could be a
you're so
spinoff.
you're
Okay.
so kind. Well, I don't want you to feel that I'm stealing your genius, but it's
No.
more just that you take it as inspiration, you know.
Exactly. That is what it is. It is, I've shared this many times, Heather. The, the Lynette Corella, Adam Carella's wife, did 4 or 5 episodes where she talked to friends of her and Adam that were Springsteen fans. And I was fascinated by that. And she quit doing them.
Oh,
And so I wanted to hear more stories. I wanted
yeah.
to hear stories from Springsteen fans. And now then I've learned that I love talking to anyone who's passionate about, you know, music, and
Yeah.
I love talking to other
Yeah.
podcasters.
Yeah.
So I think this is just all, it is, I think it's just all helping each other. So it's great.
It's wonderful. You draw out these connections so well, and I think it's so lovely, as we were saying, that these great artists, Springsteen changed your life, Leonard Cohen
Yeah.
changed my life, and what they do is they make connections with each other. But you also, and you've in your own work, you've also performed that alchemy. You've brought people together, and that's such a beautiful thing.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you to say. All right, hang tight.
Right.
Listeners, you be safe. Remember to wash your hands. Remember to social distance. Wear an effing mask. Let's be good to each other because that's the only way we're going to get through this. But for now, take care and we will talk to you soon. Goodbye. Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts as well as a Mary Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now who does, you can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference. You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.